Universes, timelines, the multiverse. In the last two episodes, we've taken a look at how branching timelines built the foundation of the MCU's multiverse, and how these timelines are created in the first place. This week we're going to examine how they are connected and how Marvel has set up their multiverse. So make sure to stick around till the end to find out whether Peter 2 and Peter 3 are variants of Peter 1, the same way that Sylvie is a variant of Loki, and if so, how are the universes connected to the MCU's sacred timeline? Oh, and just to be clear, spoilers for Doctor Strange 2, Endgame, and Loki.
Not bad.
Okay, so if Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was any indicator, Marvel is keen on expanding the MCU's multiverse, which they've started building up ever since Endgame, where we've seen a whole lot of terminology being thrown around along the lines of universes, dimensions, realms, timelines, and the greater multiverse. For the purpose of this video, we're going to focus on these three, since they're kind of more connected than the rest, but we'll get to that in the next episode. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, so let's kick things off with what we're already familiar with. Universes. The best example for a universe is, well, our universe. As in our real life universe and everything in it. Planets, black holes, nebula, and dropped ice cream. So we can understand a universe to be basically this bubble of space which contains Earth, all the other planets and stars. You get the drill. The important thing to note here is that similar to our universe, a given universe contains one planet Earth. See, we often talk about universes in terms of Earths, as in Earth 616 or Earth 838, since Earth is almost always the planet on which the action takes place. The point is that all of these Earths are contained within their own universes, which we would then call Universe 616 and Universe 838, which would then contain their own Sun 616, Moon 616, and Uranus 616. And that of course also goes for Universe 838. So now that we know what a universe is, we can talk about the multiverse. Now, as you've already probably guessed, a multiverse is then a group of universes. We can either have one universe in which every other universe resides in, or if you want to get extra fancy, you can introduce multiple multiverses and then call all of that an omniverse. Go nuts with that. But that kind of goes a bit overboard for this video, so let's instead stick to the concept of a multiverse for now. Now, as we've already seen in the MCU, in for example Loki or No Way Home, it's possible to travel through the multiverse, meaning traveling from one universe to the next. And since every universe stands on its own, with its own Earth and people, etc., you can run into this new universe's version of yourself. Traveling the multiverse, however, is not an easy task, and up until Multiverse of Madness, happened rather by accident than intent. With America Chavez, however, we have our first official gateway into the multiverse. Besides, Doctor Strange's accidental memory spell, which by the way demonstrates that it is technically possible to travel the multiverse via sorcery, since Strange's spell in No Way Home pulled the Spider-Man and villains into the 616 universe. Even though I think that the MCU sorcerers haven't quite figured out yet how to do that safely. So that's pretty much all we need to know for now about the multiverse. Cool, now for the fun stuff. Timelines. How do they fit into all of this? Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, because if we try to map universes onto timelines, there's actually three possible ways in which we can do that. Number one, we could have multiple timelines in each universe. We've seen this view pop up a bunch lately, and I can see why. I mean, on a first glance, there's nothing inherently wrong with this approach, and when Endgame introduced timelines, we weren't even talking about the multiverse yet. Plus, in Loki, He Who Remains explained that he isolated the MCU, and we still had a bunch of timelines in the show. On the other hand, we could also have the opposite. Multiple universes on the same timeline. Interestingly enough, I've never seen anyone trying to make this view make sense. It does get kind of weird once you start thinking about it, since you'd end up with multiple Earths, for example, on the same timeline, and considering what Loki established, this view doesn't seem too likely in my book. Now, if that's your preferred approach, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, but you might want to still stick around just to see if I can persuade you. Because there's one last option. The simplest one. One universe on one timeline. This would give us an inherent connection between timelines and the multiverse. We would have multiple timelines branching further and further, and each of these branches would represent a universe. Each time a branch forms, a new universe is created. This view is not only a fair bit simpler than the other two, and we already know how Feige tends to keep things simple, but once we really dig into the mechanics that have already been established, it fits way better. Let me explain. In Loki episode 6, He Who Remains states that he discovered that there were universes stacked on top of his own, and once he discovered these universes, he made contact with the other versions of himself, or variants, that lived in these universes. This led then to the multiversal war, which he won. To prevent another multiversal war, his idea is to isolate his timeline from all the others. Now this in and of itself kind of sets timelines and universes on the same level already, but it gets even better. After he isolated his timeline, he wants to keep it from branching, because he knows that if a branch splits from the timeline, it creates a parallel universe on that branch, which could then result into another version of himself being born. So since he initially fought with variants of other universes, and then later wants to prevent branches from forming to prevent more variants, He Who Remains effectively equated timelines to universes. For more on this, check out our previous episode, where we broke the entire thing down in greater detail. If you've seen the episode already, you've seen us making the case that the sacred timeline has in fact always had side branches running next to it. This would then of course also imply that these branches are also universes. Meaning that before Sylvie's branch got pruned, we could have said that she's from another universe. I mean, we still can, just not around anymore. Ultimately though, with his speech about stacked universes, He Who Remains basically told us that universes and timelines are essentially the same. Well, except of course that a timeline is a temporal concept that depicts a universe in all of its states, past the future, much like a movie reel, where a frame from the start of the reel represents a universe in its earliest days, while a frame at the end would show a universe that has lived its life. Another argument for one universe being on one timeline can be made once we compare Multiverse of Madness and Loki. In Loki, it was established that change is important, meaning that if an event on the timeline suddenly changes, this change could result in a timeline branching. We now call the reality on this new branch a new universe, next to the one that's on the original branch. This means that in the new universe, some things are going to be different from the original universe. This connection to change is also very visible in Multiverse of Madness, where we are introduced to the A38 universe as everything similar but red means go. Here we also have a bunch of universes that in some way differ from the one we already know. This could be a very small change, like for example, red means go, or it could be an astronomical change, like everything's paint for some reason. But the importance of change in the multiverse also shows up in another corner of the MCU. The question regarding what if this change took place is literally the premise of the show What If, in which we explore how known events in the 616 universe play out differently if we change one thing. aka create one branch, aka create a universe in which Peggy took the serum instead of Steve. That's how universes and timelines are connected. One universe lives on one timeline. Since timelines branch all the time, we end up with multiple universes, all of which are contained within the multiverse. And since branches form because an event on a timeline changed in the first place, this change causes the new universe to be different in some way, which brings us back to What If. See, there's one peculiar little episode in there that seems to make things insanely complicated. In the Doctor Strange episode, the Ancient One, or as she puts it, an echo of herself, explains to Strange that she drew upon the power of the Dark Dimension to split the timeline, to split you, allowing for two of your possible timelines to occur in one universe. Perfect. Two timelines in one universe. I guess by now you can see how this seems to fly straight into the face of pretty much everything we just talked about. But hang on, because Strange then questions her decision by saying,
I doubt that's the simplest or smartest thing to do.
To which the Ancient One replies, exceedingly dangerous actually. And why is that important? Because this heavily implies that this is highly uncommon. Because the usual way of things is that there is only one universe per timeline, it is such a strange, pun intended, complicated and dangerous thing to do. Splitting the timeline without creating a separate universe for that timeline. Having two timelines coexist in the universe goes so heavily against the nature of the multiverse that the Ancient One and Strange are running out of time. They need to stop Strange Supreme, because if he succeeds in reversing an absolute point in our universe, the resulting temporal paradox will destroy this universe. And obviously that's not good. But the interesting thing here is that despite the sort of clouded speech that the Ancient One is using here, with her temporal paradox, we actually get some pretty good visual clues here to what's going on. Notice all this black sort of goo drifting off of things? The way that the entire city just melts away? I don't know about you, but given that we're quite literally talking about two timelines colliding here, to me, this looks like an incursion. See, incursions were officially introduced into the MCU in Multiverse of Madness, where Reed Richards explains, Steven, Your arrival here confuses and destabilizes reality. The larger the footprint you leave behind, the greater the risk of an incursion, implying that messing with a universe that's not yours might trigger one. And we even get to see that. Once again, buildings drifting apart, the city melting away. That's what an incursion looks like. And that's also what you get once you start tampering with the multiverse, meaning messing around with reality to a degree where you literally start splitting the timeline of a universe so that there are two timelines in that universe. The result is the destruction of the universe, because there's only supposed to be one timeline per universe. Okay, so now that we understand how universes and timelines relate to one another within the multiverse, we're only left with our initial question. Are Tobey's and Andrew's Spider-Man variants of our 616 Spider-Man over here, the same way that Sylvie's a variant of Loki? Well, based on everything we covered so far, yeah. I mean, we know that they're from different universes than the 616 universe, that's for sure. But by now we've also established that universes in general can be understood as timelines as well, meaning that they somehow share a connection with our 616 universe, via the tree of timelines, with all of its branches, where one eventually led to their universes and the other to the MCU one. And I also think that's how Marvel wants us to see them. If we have a given character in our universe and a different version of that character in another universe, that's a variant. Because after all, Marvel wants to keep things simple. Oh yeah, and one last fun little side note here, what Multiverse of Madness told us about Incursions kind of resets the entire scene for No Way Home. Since now we know that all the villains in Tobey's and Andrew's Spider-Man had to leave rather sooner than later, because similarly to Strange and Multiverse of Madness, had they stayed for too long, that's right, incursion time, baby! And the same obviously also goes for Vulture in the Sonyverse. But for now, that's their dumpster fire to deal with. Our work is done here. So what do you guys think? Is the MCU going forward with a one universe equals one timeline policy, or do you have another theory entirely? Whose variants would you like to see popping up in the future? Leave us your thoughts in the comments down below and subscribe so you can join us next time when we explore the canon of your favorite cosmic. Goodbye.